I invite you to take out your New Testaments and open to John chapter 20. We have for some time now been about once a month doing some expository lessons from the Gospel of John, and we've come to the resurrection. And truly, as we have already studied, it was the death of Jesus, it was the shedding of his blood that actually paid for sin. It was the redemptive price for sin. Not the death, burial, and resurrection, the death. The offering of his body, the shedding of that blood, which is a euphemism for saying he died. Shedding blood, we even use that terminology today. But the significance of that is not merely the blood gushing from his body, but the fact that he gave his life. He gave up the divine life in our stead, the life that we should have sacrificed for our own sins. He sacrificed himself for our sins. And so we've looked at what John has to say in chapter 19 about that and about the burial of that body by Joseph and Nicodemus and how that even fulfilled prophecy. But here in chapter 20, we actually come to that which I would say, at least on some level, legitimizes the death. The death is the redemptive payment, but without the resurrection, if Jesus could or would not have been raised, then that would have made his words empty, his prophecy about being raised negated. And if that happened, that would mean that his life and his death was no different than any other man. And so the resurrection has to take place to verify, if you will, or substantiate what Jesus has been saying. He's been telling the disciples he's not merely going to die, but he's going to be raised again, and not just raised again, but raised again on the third day. He was very specific as to what would happen. So if the resurrection does not happen, then Jesus' life and death is negated. His word is negated. So this must happen. And of course it does happen because Jesus is God. Jesus is who he said he was. One other note on the resurrection, and then we'll take a look at especially verses 1 through 18 is what we're going to cover tonight. I've said this before. I think it always impresses me when I go back through a study of the Gospels or just thinking about the resurrection. You know, the most pivotal event in the history of mankind isn't described. Jesus, the fancy theological word, revivification, Jesus coming back to life is not described in the Scriptures. Isn't that weird? The thing you would think God would give us reams of information on, how Jesus actually, the dead body, the corpse of Jesus, actually came back to life. Not a word. Not a word. Now, the fact that he's resurrected, that's attended to copiously in Scripture, but not the process of coming back to life. Again, this is one of those things that, to me, is an evidence that this is not a human product, the Bible. Because humans would have, waxed eloquent and on about this wondrous event of the body of Jesus, his chest began to heave upward as he took his first breaths and his eyelids began to bat, and he came, nothing. Nothing. I find that fascinating. And I find it an evidence. It's an internal evidence that this is not written by men. Okay, so enough of that. Chapter 20, verses 1 through 10. On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They've taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Peter therefore went out, the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter. Now, again, the other disciple is John, referring to himself in the third person. The other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who came to the tomb first went in also, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again to their own homes. If we take the Gospels, and we take especially 1 Corinthians 15, we come to a count of 11 different appearances of the Lord after he was raised from the dead. Appearances mainly to his disciples, not going to the enemy, not presenting himself to the Sanhedrin and saying, "See, I told you so." But why 11? And I think we begin to see it here, but it's really embellished more in the other gospel accounts. You know, people, we're people. People are more emotionally fragile than sometimes we realize. And we know the end of this story. We know how all this is laid out. They didn't know that. Can you imagine being confronted with someone who's come back from the dead? How would you react? Again, we know this story so well. It's like, what is wrong with these guys? You know, why didn't they just accept Jesus like we do today? We're not living this out one moment at a time, 1 hour at a time. And even though Jesus has tried to prepare them for this, they were not prepared. So they're emotionally trying to, as we say, wrap their heads around what's going on, and God, in His patience and in His grace, is giving them time and gradually leading them to the truth that things have happened exactly the way God had intended for them to happen. Jesus was intended to die. He was intended to be murdered. Not that that was God's desire, but it was all part and parcel of the redemptive price that was to be paid and the exposure of sin for what it really was. This is all according to plan. Men have not checked in their free will. They're still exercising that, but they, for their own reasons, are doing what they're doing, but it all comes under the umbrella of God's will being done. And it's very difficult sometimes for the human brain to embrace what God is doing. We want to hold God to our standards. We want to have our expectations. We want to exercise our assumptions. God doesn't operate on our time frame. God doesn't operate on our principles. And what He's doing is being very, very patient with those that were the closest to Jesus and enabling them to wrap their heads around what's actually happened. So, what are we reading here? The apostles have been in hiding since Friday afternoon when Jesus died on the cross. John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, is the only one said to be at the cross. Remember, he is entrusted with Mary's care, Jesus' mother. The others are hiding, and they're afraid, and they're distraught. As the two disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24 say, "We thought this was the Messiah, but our hopes have been dashed." Things have not happened the way that we thought they would. There we go again, trying to hold God, to our assumptions. And so the disciples are in hiding. It is the women who have been attending to Jesus all this time in His ministry that actually go to the tomb. The last thing the disciples are expecting is for the resurrection to occur. Again, that which we take for granted with 2,000 years of hindsight. They were not expecting that. So the first indicator that something is amiss is when, and now from the apostles' point of view, is when Mary Magdalene comes rushing to them in something of a panic and says that the Lord's body is missing from the tomb. note here, and this is where we have not discrepancy, but we do have difference between the Gospel of John and the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because if we read the other accounts, it sounds very much like Mary and the other women all together go to the tomb, see the stone rolled away, look inside, and there are two angels in the tomb. And the angels are explaining to them what's going on. It's only the Gospel of John that tells us that's not exactly the way it happened with Mary. So the first resurrection appearance, as Mark makes plain, is to Mary Magdalene. But according to what John is saying here, she doesn't see what the other women saw. So how do you explain that? How do you rectify that? The only way I can rectify that is as a group, they come to the tomb. Remember, it's still dawning. One account says dark. The other one says the sun has come up. So in that transition period between the sun rising and still in that dusky, hazy look to the day, they see the stone is no longer at the mouth of the tomb. Remember, they had watched that. They had watched where Joseph placed the body in his new tomb. They come to the tomb and the stone's rolled away. My conjecture from this would be Mary turns and runs. She takes off to go tell the disciples what she's found. The other women then stay at the tomb, look inside, and see the angels. When Mary comes to John and Peter, she says nothing about angels. She says nothing about a conversation of these men dressed in white and, why are you seeking the living with the dead? And the instruction that Jesus is going to meet with them. Again, none of that is said. So it's not easy to put together all of these 11 resurrection appearances and make them mesh perfectly. At some point, we're going to have to look at what appears to be something of a contradiction and say, okay, what's the fuller explanation of that? What are the possibilities here? Because we know the Holy Spirit's not going to contradict himself. But in these accounts, I think we've got to take several things into account. Number one, human nature and emotional limitations. And I'll say something about that in just a moment. But this is sort of unfolding, if we can put ourselves in their position, unfolding in real time. And Mary, who had a special affinity for the Lord, remember, washing his feet with her hair with the expensive ointment, wiping his feet, she deeply loves Jesus. We'll see that as this story unfolds. But she's so distraught to know or to perhaps surmise somebody's monkeyed with the tomb. That stone is supposed to be on it, and she undoubtedly would have seen it sealed. They watched what was happening. And now she's disturbed and she sees the stone rolled away. Boom. She turns and runs and says, they've taken away the Lord out of the tomb and we do not know where they've laid him. She doesn't say anything about angels. What the angels said. The news that she brings results in a foot race that John wins. John outruns Peter to the tomb, but consistent with their characters, John's a little more hesitant and stops at the mouth of the tomb. Peter, boom, right on past John. He wants to find out what's going on. Not being critical of Peter, it's the difference in their personalities. Peter's more like, let's take the bull by the horns, and I'm going to figure out what's going on here. Boom, right past John into the tomb, and then we have the result of him looking in and his example being set for then John also to look into the tomb. And what did they see? It says they saw linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief, or some versions might say face cloth or something like that, had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself. So this is referring to the wrappings that Nicodemus and Joseph had put on the body when they brought the spices and hurriedly prepared Jesus' body for burial. It's interesting when you read this, John really does write this as an eyewitness. He stooped down. The handkerchief was not lying with the other cloths, folded together in a place by itself. Those are the words of somebody that saw what they're now reporting. John testifies that in verses 8 and 9, he went into the tomb and saw this. And it says he saw and believed. What do we make of that? Because we're going to see several appearances by Jesus wherein the disciples are reluctant to believe that this is really Jesus. I would only say this. It seems to me that John has more spiritual insight than the other one. Maybe John's listened more closely. Maybe John's pondered things on a deeper level. And again, belief can occur in various proportions. The demons believe and tremble. To the disciples that believed in Jesus, he said, if you really follow me and keep my word, then you'll be disciples indeed. You'll know the truth shall make you free. We talked about that last week. But then there are those that would believe to the point of giving up their life for the Lord. Belief is not static. It comes in stages. It's possessed in various intensities. I would only say John's ahead of his peers in seeing what he's seeing even early on and concluding, wait a minute, I think I remember Jesus saying something about this. So it said John saw and believed. Now there's another element to all of this. And we're not given an explanation, so again, we can maybe make a conjecture, which I think might be a fair one, but we're not given the details. If this was nothing more than a grave robbery, after all, it was a rich man's tomb, right? If this is a grave robbery, why did they take the body? People don't usually break into tombs and take the body. They take the gold and the jewels and whatever else of value may be buried with the body. The second thing is, why are the grave clothes off? And when we say this, grave clothes, we probably should think more like mummy. Wrappings. You put spice in and you wrap, and you put spice in and you wrap to help preserve the body from decay. Why would grave robbers take a body, and if they did, why would they unwrap it and lay the headscarf separately folded up? Remember, there were Roman guards guarding this tomb. If you're a grave robber, or you want to perpetuate the myth that Jesus was raised from the dead, why would you unwrap the body and fold the cloths in which the body had been placed? That makes zero sense to any other explanation besides resurrection. And yet this is what they see. The body's been unwrapped. The body is gone. The Roman guards at this point are nowhere to be seen. The tomb had been sealed by Roman authority. What's going on here? And John is beginning to put this together far quicker, apparently, than his fellows will do. Let's continue with verses 11 through 18. The focus now is back on Mary Magdalene. And remember, as we said before, John writes supplementally. He includes details not in the other Gospels. Sometimes he leaves things out that are in the other Gospels because they're either not germane to his writing or it's already been said. I'm not going to plow that ground again. But he's giving us more information about Mary and the women and the fact that, as we just said a moment ago, Mary, not the Sanhedrin, not the male apostles, which would normally would follow social protocol. A woman's testimony in that day wasn't even legal. It was not legally acceptable. And yet, what do we see way back in John 4? Jesus first reveals himself as the Messiah to a Samaritan woman. Now he reveals himself as raised from the dead to a woman. Again, God does not do things the way we would assume they would be done given the culture of the day. Verse 11, but Mary stood outside by the tomb. She apparently followed Peter and John to the tomb. That's not expressly said, but we see she's at the tomb. Mary stood outside the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Then they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Now when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." Can you imagine how he said that? It's kind of like my children who say, "Dad, Dad," and I don't hear them. And then they go, "Jim." That always gets your attention when your children call you by your first name. Mary, there's got to be some emphatic stress there. Mary, and she's probably heard that before, and this awakens her. She turned and said to him, "Rabboni," teacher, which is to say teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken these things to her. We already said that in Matthew's account, Mary comes to the tomb with a number of other women that are named. And those women saw an angel, and in Matthew 28, 1-6, I'm not going to read it if you want to make a note of it. But that angel explains briefly to them what's going on. No, it's not a grave robbery. Nobody else has broken in and stolen the body so they could concoct a resurrection myth. Why are you seeking the living with the dead? He's risen. Mark notes they entered the tomb, the women, and saw a young man clothed in a white robe, Mark 16 and verse 5, who explained again what's transpiring. Mark notes, now when he arose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. She went and told those who had been with him as they mourned and wept. But now we read from John, she did not actually see or hear the angel. John records here in chapter 20 that Mary is alone at the tomb after Peter and John leave. She is still distraught. She doesn't understand what's happening. She is weeping. It's still early morning. She stoops down to look inside. Only now does she see two angels in white sitting in the tomb. One at the head where Jesus' body had been, and the other at the feet. And they ask what seems to be a rather obvious question, but I think there's a reason for it. There always is a reason when God or angels say something. "Woman, why are you weeping?" We might say, well, duh. But what's the point? You ought to be rejoicing. If you understood what you're looking at. You understood what you're looking at, an empty tomb. And what that means, you shouldn't be weeping. You should be rejoicing. Why are you weeping? Mary is not seeing the full picture. So what does she say? "They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Where is his body?" They had come to anoint the body. Perhaps, they don't trust what men did, a couple days before. So they're going to do it the right way, and there's no body to anoint. Where is it? Then it says, in verse 15, Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" The same words. So you got the two angels in the tomb saying this. Now there's a voice behind her. "Woman, why are you weeping?" She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you've taken him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I'll take him away." Okay, this sounds a little strange. She turns and sees Jesus, but doesn't see Jesus. Okay, so I'll share another anecdote, as I did this morning with our trip to Tucson. I'll share another anecdote with you as to how you can be looked at and somebody doesn't really see you. When we were in Moab, Utah, we stayed in a hotel. We'd been there 2 nights. This was the morning we were leaving. And we have a friend who lives in the North Salt Lake City area, but that's like 4.5 to 5 hours away from where we were staying. We knew that he had a house that he's building about another 45 minutes or so past Moab. And we had contacted him about the state of the house and was it in a condition that we could stay in if we were out there. And he said, well, it's dried in, but there's a lot of unfinished work inside. And, next time you come out and it'll be done, you can stay in the house. We said, fine, thank you, got a hotel. That morning we go down for breakfast before we leave. We had a long drive that day, all the way back to Cottonwood, Arizona. It's going to be about 6.5 hours. We walk in the breakfast room, and it's just the standard hotel buffet. And there's a guy sitting in the first table. Now, the person I'm referring to lives in Salt Lake City, went prematurely white-headed. There's a guy sitting at the table. He's got his head down eating. He's got white hair, but he's not old. And I'm looking at him, and Melanie walks on past him to go get coffee. First thing she does in the morning. She goes to get coffee, and I'm standing there looking at this guy, and I'm going, is that Matt Marshall? You know how it is when somebody's totally out of place, And she's coming back, and I'm doing the classic. She's walking this way, Matt's sitting here, and I'm going, because I didn't want to embarrass myself and say something to this guy, and he goes, no, I'm John Smith. Leave me alone. So she walks around, and she does the classic like this, and he's still got his head down eating, and about then, he looked up and looked at me right in the face and didn't recognize me. I was not what he was expecting. He was not what I was expecting. But I had time, to investigate and think about, do I know this person? He looked at me and looked off and went right back to eating. And finally I said, Matt? Mary? I said, Matt? Well, you could have blown him over with a feather. Here's a guy by himself in a restaurant, in a hotel. The last thing he expects is to hear his name. And sure enough, it was Matt. He was coming down to work on the house. He could have picked any weekend, but he picked that one. He could have picked any hotel. There's a lot of them in Moab. He picked that one. He could have gone to breakfast. We could have gone to breakfast at any other time, but there we were. It's just one of those weird, out-of-body sort of experiences, like there's a disturbance in the force. That's how you can look at somebody that you know. I've known Matt Marshall for over 30 years. This is how you can look at somebody and not see them. Because this is what happens. Our minds play tricks on us. Something you're not expecting to see, you may look right at it and not see it. It's not what you're expecting. Or they're not what you're expecting. So Mary sees Jesus, but it's still early morning. She's looking for a corpse, not Jesus living, standing behind her. And so it's when he calls her by name, Mary. The tone, her name being spoken. Again, she's heard this before, and she turns, and there's Jesus. She originally thought he was the gardener, the keeper of the cemetery, I suppose. And what does she say? Sir, verse 15, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away. I just want the body. Just show me what you've done with the body. And of course, Jesus reveals himself as being alive and do not cling to me. Can you imagine what she did? Probably just grabbed him around the knees. I cannot believe, it's like Matt Marshall in the breakfast room. I cannot believe what I'm seeing here. She grabs on, and Jesus says, you don't have to hang on to me. I'm not going anywhere. Well, I mean, he is. He's going to Galilee. But I'm not going away. I'm not leaving here. You don't have to hang on to me. You'll have another chance to be with me again. But go tell my brethren, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. That's coming, and we know that's coming about 40 days later than the extra 10 for the day of Pentecost. But about 40 days later, this is what is going to happen. Go and tell my brethren the good news. You don't need to be weeping. You need to be rejoicing. I'm alive. Here's the question I want to leave you with, and then we'll close tonight. If you were talking to Jesus and didn't know it, what would he hear? Because that's exactly what happens to Mary. She's talking to Jesus, thinking he's the gardener. And what does Jesus hear? He hears love and care. Just tell me where you put the body, and I'll take it away. I mean, really? Mary's going to take away the dead body of Jesus? But that's what she wants. I want to take care of his body. If you were talking to Jesus and you didn't know he was Jesus, what would he hear? Would he hear words of love and devotion and care, and that he was the utmost priority of your life in that moment, like Mary? Jesus was her highest, or his body was her highest priority, and she voiced that to him. It was unvarnished. It was the raw truth, because she didn't know who he was. She bravely offers to take the corpse and take care of it. So what would Jesus, in our unguarded moments, if he were listening, what would he hear? You know, that's what happened with the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. They didn't know it was Jesus. They were distraught at what had happened. They didn't believe that he had been raised. But back to the question of what would the Lord hear if we were talking to him and we didn't know it was him. Would he hear courage? Would he hear devotion? Would he hear priority, that he has the top priority in our lives? Would he hear complaint? Would he hear denial? Would he hear doubt? What would he hear? What would he hear if he were in front of us and we didn't know it, but we spoke our heart? We spoke our true self. Well, Mary is not feigning anything. She's not feigning her faith. She's distraught, all right, but her top priority is, I want to take care of that body. I want to take care of his corpse. I want to find it. It's gone. I want to find it, and I want to anoint it properly and have him to have an honorable burial. Jesus hears true devotion, true love, true dedication. And I hope that's what he would hear from us. If Jesus were eavesdropping in on our conversations at home or at work or among our friends or here at the church building, I would hope, for me, for my own self, that if I were to speak about Jesus in an unguarded moment, it would be saying what I'm supposed to be saying. Something of faith and devotion and appreciation and love for him. Don't ever let anything come out of our mouths but that. Because, you know, he is listening all the time. He's listening. And what is he hearing from us as we speak about him? As we speak about his will? As we speak about his words? As we speak about him as we're doing tonight? I hope what he would hear is that which would honor him, and that which would demonstrate our own faith and our love for him, and our thankfulness, as Keith mentioned in his prayer tonight, for his mercy and grace, and the opportunity that he's given us, not by our merit, but by his own love and mercy to be with him forever. And that he would hear statements like that from us. To Mary's credit, when she anointed him in the earlier meal, earlier that week, Jesus said, what she's done will be remembered forever. And what she does here is being remembered 2,000 years later because we just preached on it. What a great disciple she was. Brings us back to our lesson this morning. There's room in the kingdom for the small things that we can do. Male, female, young, old, educated, not, it doesn't matter. What matters is devotion. What matters is appreciation. What matters is love. What matters is heartfelt service. That's what God's looking for. However we can offer that with whatever resources he's given to us to give that service back. Before we dismiss tonight, we'll sing an invitation song. And this is not our invitation, it's the Lord's. If there's someone here tonight that needs to respond to him, if there's something missing or something neglected, something that needs to be corrected in your life, whether a sin of a public nature that needs to be dealt with, or whether it's to come to him in initial obedience and become his child, maybe something we've said in the lesson tonight will encourage you to respond to him in whatever way you need as we stand and sing.